Hello everyone, Tabitha here. Recently we took a look at the Schmincke Naturals by Schmincke. And as you can see, the swatches that we did in that video, which I will put a link in this video if you'd like to see them swatched out. Some absolutely gorgeous colors, but I had a streakiness problem. The consistency felt very like slick. So what I did is I started drying them in pans, and I'm going to give you a close-up. Now, I added a couple of colors on both sides, which I will swatch out on my little swatch sheet today because we're going to see how these re-wet in comparison to these. And you can see how they dried. Lots of divots. I had these completely filled to the top. Let them dry for about a week and a half. I'd say a couple of them still have, you could still probably push down on them and have a little bit of like bounce to them. Some of them dried so much that it doesn't even look like I put paint, hardly any paint in there, and they were completely filled up. I'd say several of the earth tones are like that. The yellows didn't go down as much, but some of these browns and the graphite, really, that's, I think, the biggest one. I think it lost 3/4 of its mass drying. So they kind of didn't dry in the pans real well, but we're going to actually swatch these out again, and we're going to see how they re-wet from dried pans, because we kind of had so many problems with the actual swatching of them when they were straight out of the tube. So first up we have the dragon's blood, and it looks like it's re-wetting beautifully. I did not pre-wet or put a drop on it. It grabbed onto the brush well, and let's just see. And that actually looks like it's swatched out quite beautiful. And now we have the madder. Sorry about the phone going off. They don't seem quite as intense, but I'm sure if you pre-wet these, they would. They're not quite having the streakiness like they did, which is good. And they don't have the slip like they did. I hope you don't mind me doing my little swatch card here. But I really wanted to see how these re-wet, and I waited as long as I could for them to dry in the pans. I mean, they obviously, some of them need to be topped off, because, I mean, you'd have to wad your brush down in there. And this is that red bolus. And I'll put this card next to the colors that we swatched straight out of the tube as well. They were pretty slippery in their pour, as well as when I was painting them out the last time. And this is that curcuma. I'm totally butchering pronouncing these. I know that. Just a nice quick little swatch. So if you were interested in these paints, you could see if it was worth putting them in pans, if they'd feel a little different. Lots of people had a lot of questions on these paints when I had shown them straight out of the tube. And that's the Kamala. Now we're going into the yellow ochre. There's not a lot of difference in between these three colors. I definitely think that you don't need all of them. This is that Lavanite Violet. And this one kind of sank way in. It's one of the ones that sank way in. It's a very interesting color though. They do have a much better paint out from the dry pans than they did from the tube. Then we have Still de Grand. And this one did have a little bit of stickiness still to it. Beautiful color though. Seems like they're painting out pretty close to how they were out of the tube. And I will bring you in for a much closer look. This is that Rugen chalk. And I thought this was going to be really opaque, this color, and it barely has any tint to it. I think this is definitely one you could probably skip. And then we have, this is the most sunken one, and this is the graphite. And it picked up really well. I love this color, but I can't believe how much volume it lost drying in a pan. It's barely grabbed onto the sides, and I know that I had it full to the top. And now we have the indigo. And I'm sorry I'm doing these a little sloppily. This swatch card is quite tiny, but it's going to fit in this palette so that I can play with it more and see how these paint out. I think some of these colors are absolutely gorgeous, and I'm so glad they are painting out so much better from the actual dried pans. I just can't believe how much volume a few of them lost. And then green slate. This color out of a pan is not as interesting as out of the tube. Turned into kind of more of an average gray. It doesn't seem to have that granular feel to it that it did out of the tube. And then we have the Camvinus Earth. I know I'm butchering the names again. I'm so sorry about that. And this one was not great coming out of the tube, and it's equally not exciting, I have to say. This would be a skip one for me. So far there's only been 3 that I can say these might be close in range, but they're all beautiful colors. But that one's very non-exciting. And then we have the Caledonite, which is the same pigment number as the one before it, the PG23 that we had the problems with. And this is at least a slightly better color here. And then last up on our row, we have the Dyer's Green, which is quite a beautiful color. Let me see if I can get the other two just maybe a tiny bit more. This is a kind of a pretty color if you like the really subtle green earths. But this Canaceous earth, yeah. Unless you like very, very subtle things. I'm really piling it on and it's barely there. And I will add I'll show you the colors that I added to the little palette too. And for the extra colors just in my little palette so that I can show you what we got going on here. I did put in the Schmincke Conceal Red. So I think it adds a little something over here. And you can see how easily that re-wet and how brilliant. Then we have in a little Potters. I felt that Potters kind of went with this palette. I have so much fun putting palettes together, I tell you. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. And then the other two are by Daniel Smith. We have Kyanite, which I thought went nicely in this combo of palette. And then I popped in a little bit of Sleeping Beauty, also by Daniel Smith. Add a little bit of brightness there. So let's go ahead and let those dry, and then I'm going to put them right up to what we painted straight out of the tube, and we can kind of see the consistency is so much better out of the pan. If you are going to get these paints, I think you definitely have to dry them in a pan. While that little swatch card's drying, I thought we'd do a little test. Let's get a little water down here on this corner, and let's see if these move out of the pans. They really were streaky, and they really did not move when they were right out of the tube. They almost had a slick feeling. I almost felt like they had an oily feel to them. So let's just put in a couple of drops. I got a little fuzzy on there. And we'll put on a good pile of little water here. Just go right over the writing. I try and jot down notes for myself and everything under all my swatches, because I will not remember. All right, I think we have that really nice and saturated. Let's go ahead and try a little bit. This is that let me make sure I pronounce it correctly. Curcumbra. And let's zoom in a little bit. They are not, if you can see those dots down there, they are not moving at all. Let's try one of the other yellows. Tiny bit more, not much at all. Let's try something like the graphite. Tiny bit, not much movement. Let's try the dragon's blood. I had a little bit, I think, of graphite left on that brush. Let's a little bit better. Still, it's not crazy movement with these at all. Let's try a little Stille de Grand. Yeah, these are quite heavy natural pigments. I don't think they're going to move much at all. Let's try this Dryer's Green. I really like the color. Pretty much none of them are moving. Let's try a little indigo. They're not even blending naturally on the page. They're kind of staying exactly where I put them. I mean, there's a couple little tails there, but not much of any movement at all. Let's just compare that to the conceal that I have in this little palette and see. And that's not a huge mover either. Is there anything else I wanted to try in there? Let's try that violet. This violet is such a subtle, pretty color. Yeah, no, these are all kind of natural heavy pigments. Let me move the palette off to the side. Let me lift this up so that you can see. I know it's still pretty wet, but those dots hardly moved at all, and I literally had just like a bubble of water sit there, and they still didn't move. If I tilt the paper a little bit, you'll see a little bit of movement, but not much of anything at all. So these are definitely going to be, if you like your control in your paints, these are definitely the route to go. Let's see how these are drying over here. A couple of them are still damp. I'd say out of the pan, I'd say that the consistency is 20 times better. They're not streaky like they were out of the tube. They don't have that slick feeling. And I'd say most of the colors here, the dragon's blood, I'd say out of the pan might be not quite as, I'd say it's more in its mid zone there. And the green slate tended to not have as much granular to it. Now these are small swatches, but yeah, it kind of lost a little something in transition. But I'd say all the other colors are just as vibrant and just as beautiful. As out of the tube, which is something that I really liked about the paints. The colors were so vivid and so beautiful. And, you know, I really wanted to like these paints. So I've constantly been trying to like dry them in pans and change it up. So definitely these paints are beautiful out of a pan. Don't use them out of the tube. You will end up with, I was working on these and they were still streaky and kind of not doing much of anything at all, at least in my opinion. They don't move on the page. They tend to really stay where you put them. So they are like a heavier pigmented paint. And in my opinion, number one, you do not need all three of these yellows. They're way too close in range. I would pick one, maybe two of those. The Still the Grain, I think, is absolutely gorgeous. The Dyer's Green is absolutely gorgeous. The Madder Lake is exactly what you would expect. The Indigo is exactly what you would expect. The Dragon's Blood is quite beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The black in here, which one is that called? The Graphite. It sinks down. You lose a lot of volume on that paint when you dry it in a pan, but it has some kind of quality to it that I absolutely really like. The Lanvenate Violet, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, is very, very interesting. I would completely, if you like a really subtle green, that's pretty, but I think this one I would go for, and I would completely skip the Carnaceous Earth and the Ruger's Chalk. I think you're not going to get anything really out of them. If this one was extremely opaque and had like some kind of different quality to it, but it's so pale that you can barely see it, and it has a transparency to it, so it's not even going to be able to be used for highlights, and I don't even think it'll do that much in mixing. So that is my update on the Naturals by Schmincke, and I hope you found that helpful if you were looking at these. They are brilliant colors. I think if you picked, you know, 3, 4, 5 of them and put them into a pan and used them out of the pan, I think they're absolutely gorgeous and totally worth the money. And now you know my skips, my likes and dislikes. And also remember, you're going to lose a lot of volume in at least half of them when you pour them into a pan. They sink down really, really a lot. You lose a lot of volume. So the binder that they're using in it must quite evaporate when you pour them into pans, and that's why the consistency is so much better. But you're just gonna not get as many refills out of the tube of paint as you might on some of the other paints that they offer. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for sticking with me and joining me for this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.